NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has pushed back on reporting that Britain has stopped sharing intelligence on drug trafficking vessels over concerns about US military strikes in the Caribbean, saying that nothing has changed that has impeded Washington's ability to act. Speaking to reporters after a meeting of G7 foreign ministers in Canada, Rubio also said that no one had raised the operations near Venezuela during the meeting and said that Britain has not raised concerns directly with him. Rubio also called the report, which claimed that Britain had suspended intelligence sharing, as a false story without going into detail, and noted that the US has a very strong partnership with the UK. Let's listen in to Marco Rubio.
A couple points. The United States, there's reasons why we have those assets in the region, and that is to collect intelligence, and we're actioning on that. Obviously, I won't go any deeper when it comes to intelligence matters. I did see a CNN report yesterday. I'm not going to go into great detail and to say that it's a false story. It's a fake story. And what's happening now is people with a business card that has a government email on it become sources because they don't know, they're not even in the know. So they either have an agenda or they want to make themselves important. And it's been a plague of story after story that's either inaccurate or misleading, and that falls in the category of both that story.
Now, Australia's opposition Liberal Party has formally abandoned its commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, following strong support among party members to scrap the long-term climate target. While the party says it remains in Paris, the Paris Agreement, and set 5 yearly interim emissions goals. It will no longer actively pursue a net zero target, describing it instead as a welcome outcome rather than policy. The Liberal Party also agreed to repeal Labour's 2030 emissions reduction legislation, pledging to reduce emissions on average each year in line with comparable countries as fast as technologies allow without imposing mandated costs. Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan emphasised the party's approach would use all national resources, including coal, to keep energy prices low while ensuring Australia does its fair share on emissions reductions. Opposition leader Susan Lee framed the policy as a compromise between the party's moderate and conservative factions, stressing that emission goals will not come at the expense of Australian families. The decision aligns with Liberals more closely with the Nationals, which abandoned the net zero target earlier this month amid internal coalition disputes. The announcement sets the stage for a heated debate on climate energy policy ahead of upcoming elections, highlighting the divide between Australia's major parties over how to balance emissions reductions with energy security and economic priorities. Joining us now is Sankalp Saman. He's a chief climate strategist, and he joins us live from Upanishad Climate Consulting. He joins us live from Tokyo in Japan. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. How do you respond to the Liberal Party dropping its net zero 2050 target while claiming to stay in the Paris Agreement?
So it's actually deeply concerning because it comes on the eve of COP30 as the world meets to decide what are we supposed to do after we already breaching the target of 1.5 degree that we had set out in Paris Agreement for 2100 just 9 years ago. Liberal Party's decision is, of course, in following the footstep of the National Party's similar decision, but it makes no sense that you abandon your long-term carbon goals but still remain in the Paris Agreement. The whole point of Paris Agreement is to have a long-term net zero goal. Australia's previous goals were already deemed unsatisfactory by a lot of experts. Now abandoning that puts them in quite a spot.
Yes, and what impact could repealing Labour's 2030 emissions law have on Australia's ability to meet global climate commitments?
So Australia earlier had a 43% climate reduction goal based on the 2005 baseline for 2030 and a 70% emission reduction goal by 2035. Both of these would now seem to be going. And this comes in the offset of around $100 billion being raised for Australia's clean energy industry because of these goals. And there's also a lot of global trade commitments that are tied up to this, including European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism and some other investment mechanisms also that would now put Australia in a very bad spot for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and do you think relying on technology and natural resources, including coal, is sufficient to reduce emissions while addressing energy costs?
No, so that's a dream case scenario, because currently Australia is using 45% coal and roughly 39% solar and wind energy. And if you look at the prices, the cost of solar and wind is almost half of what they pay for coal. Of course, reliance on coal for meeting their energy needs makes sense, but if you deflect it by using technologies like carbon capture and storage, they are just fantasy technologies right now that have not been tested to scale. So these arguments, they are good for appeasing certain kinds of voters who are not aware about climate change. But in the longer run, it just means that Australia is shying away from meeting what it had already committed towards the climate before.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's a pleasure to have you on NewsX World. We now move on to a related development. And Indigenous people in Brazil have said that they did not intend for clashes to happen during the COP30 summit. Dozens of Indigenous protesters clashed with security guards at the COP30 summit in Brazil, causing minor injuries in a rare incident of violence at the UN climate talks. Indigenous protesters had earlier forced their way into the COP30 climate summit venue and clashed with security guards at the entrance to demand climate action and forest protection. Let's in fact listen in to what one of the Indigenous leaders had to say.
Inclusive fomos chamados de fascistas, né? Inclusive comparando ao 8 de janeiro. Né? Nós não somos fascistas, nós não somos terroristas, nós estamos do mesmo lado. Se eles quiserem estar do nosso lado, eu digo eles, o governo. Mas até então nós não sentimos essa segurança de que o governo está do lado dos povos indígenas. Além de estar nos espaços de debate, de discussão, na Zona Verde, na Cúpula dos Povos, na aldeia COP, nós queremos também estar na rua para poder ecoar nossas vozes. Não tivemos nenhum propósito de que acontecesse aquilo. Nós não temos responsabilidade.
Now, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has vowed that those allegedly involved in a massive corruption scandal linked to government infrastructure projects will be jailed by the end of the year. The scandal has shaken public confidence, particularly after failures in flood control facilities during a heavy typhoon season, and has sparked widespread protests across the country. Speaking at a televised press conference on Thursday, Marcos displayed the names of dozens of public works and officials, construction executives facing allegations before the anti-graft body. Quote, "They won't have a Merry Christmas," he said, signalling the government's intent to pursue accountability. The scandal has also been cited as a key factor behind the country's economic growth, hitting a 4-year low in the September quarter, highlighting the broader consequences of corruption on public trust and economic stability. Authorities are now under pressure to ensure that investigations are thorough and that prosecutions move forward swiftly. The Philippine public is watching closely, demanding transparency and justice as the government works to restore credibility in its infrastructure programs and safeguard the country against future failures.
Bagong Pasko, parang dito sa napakatalan dito ay padalikot na sa magtasya ng o paano pagkatapos na yung kaso nila po ng papupulong na sila. Wala silang Merry Christmas. Before Christmas, kapupulong na sila. Kaya, yung mga tao yan, na kasabot dyan, esto, panuwalang diyan dito, sa nangat-anataw ng pera ng bayan, tapos na ang maliligayas ninyo araw at hapunin ang natin sa ito.
Now, Canada's Foreign Minister, Anita Anand, has said she will meet bilaterally with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio to discuss Ukraine, efforts to advance peace in the Middle East, and the crisis in Haiti and Arctic sovereignty. Anita added that the two had already participated in several joint sessions over the past day and a half, using the meetings to coordinate on shared foreign policy priorities. Let's listen in.
I met bilaterally with Secretary Rubio, yes, and I also was obviously with him in multiple sessions throughout the past day and a half. In our bilateral meeting, we discussed a number of issues: the illegal war in Ukraine, a path to peace in the Middle East, and how we can work together in order to push forward that peace, the ongoing crisis in Haiti, on which we have worked substantially over the last number of months, and Arctic sovereignty.
However, Anand stated that both countries have reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine's long-term prosperity, security and defence. Let's listen in.
First, we reaffirmed our commitment to Ukraine's long-term prosperity, security and defence. Canada has made it a priority of our G7 presidency to maintain and strengthen our support for Ukraine at every opportunity. Today, alongside Minister Sabia, I announced new sanctions against Russia to target those who are financing Putin's illegal war.
Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that he hoped Washington would take no actions liable to escalate the Ukraine conflict. Lavrov added that US President Donald Trump had long pushed for dialogue with Russia, sought a full understanding of Russia's stance on Ukraine, and showed dedication to achieving a lasting peaceful solution.